So I want to thank you all for coming. I'm very excited to be chairing the morning session today. I'm Sue Washer, and I'm CEO and President of Applied Genetic Technologies. We're a gene therapy company based in Florida and now Cambridge, developing AAV products in the ophthalmology space. And to be sitting on a panel talking solely about reimbursement, payers, hospitalization, exemption, and regulatory and issues is really exciting for me. I've been in the gene therapy space for a long period of time, and it doesn't seem all that long ago where we were talking about animal studies and safety trials, and to have advanced the technology this far is quite exciting. So I'm here at the first panel today. I have with me Leeza, Christian, Andrea, and Francois, and we're going to have 10-minute presentations by 3 of these individuals and then ask questions. We want this to be a very interactive and participatory discussion, and so we will ask questions in between the presentations and then open it up for a broader discussion at the end. So Leeza?
All right, good morning. My name is Leeza Osipenko, and I head scientific advice at NICE. NICE is based in England, so my perspective obviously will be very English today, despite my accent. But later, when we have a discussion, hopefully we'll cover other bits of Europe and other issues of reimbursement, which is not specific to the English context. I've been to quite a few events for cell and gene therapies, and this is actually a very interesting community and raising a lot of debates. But the first or the biggest word that I always hear coming to these meetings or talking to the developers of the product is the word different. So there's this big push for different treatment, for us viewing, us as reimbursement agencies, viewing the products, the developers as special. And I was thinking about this question, whether we should or not. And, you know, when dating is not going particularly well, women become bitter and they say all men are the same. And then at some point they fall in love, they find the right guy, and right before the wedding they'll be telling you that, oh, this is the best man ever, there's no one better than that man. And then they get married, and next number of years down the line they talk to their girlfriends, and then they come to a firm conclusion that all men are the same. And I almost feel like cell and gene therapies are somewhere in the stage where they really, really want to get married and to say to the rest of the world that they are absolutely unique, that it's we need to be treating them specially. And the thing is, maybe, and maybe not. So because I don't understand, what are you trying to be different from? Are you different from monoclonal antibodies, new chemical entities? Are you different from oligonucleotides? There are a lot of amazing technologies. Who could have known that Hep C treatment would come from new chemical entity? I mean, but it happened, and that is amazing to me, and that's not a cell gene therapy. So I really think, just like all men are different, all pharmaceuticals are different, and we need to look at each product specifically. And I'm convinced that this field will deliver some amazing, amazing treatments, but this field will deliver a lot of failures and a lot of useless treatments, just like any other field. And we need to look at each product specifically, and we need to make a decision on each product based on its merits. So this guy, George Osborne, he's in charge of the English money, or the British money, I should say. And this red box, apparently this is the British budget. I always wonder what's inside, whether it's empty or there's some papers or there are gold coins, I wonder. But anyways, NHS budget is somewhere inside that red box. And it's a very small box, as you see, and it needs to pay for everything. And the decision on all the amazing new medical products in that box as well. So that pretty much equalizes you against all other players, because you need to figure out how to fit into that box and to prove that you're worth this public money to be spent on your products. And when it comes to health technology assessment, once again, no matter what kind of product we're talking about, there are key questions that you need to address and key questions that you need to think about. And it is, first of all, comparative effectiveness. It doesn't matter whether you are only able to recruit 3 patients into your single-arm trial or you're running a trial against placebo. We need to know what is your technology doing compared to what is currently done or not done. People get painkillers because there's no treatment, but they get something. So, and this is the true story, not just for NICE or England, it's a true story for any HTA content across countries that consider HTA content. There are some countries that don't look at it so far. So obviously value for money. So is this worth paying for? Are you delivering enough benefit to claim that premium price? Budget impact, it's expensive. Introducing any new product is expensive. You've probably all followed the hepatitis C situation, and everyone appreciates innovation, but we can bankrupt healthcare systems. So we need to really think about short-term budget impact. Of course, long-term promises for hepatitis C is amazing. Obviously, we'll manage to eradicate the disease eventually, but at what cost? And then longer-term outcomes and patient-relevant outcomes, very difficult to measure, very difficult to get them out of your trials, very difficult to bring them to us for decision-making, but this is what we need to make these decisions on your product. So we need to talk to you to figure out how we can get that evidence throughout the course of introduction of your product into the healthcare system. So far, it's not just a story for NICE, it's the story for all payers. We have very, very little experience with cell and gene therapies just because there are very few out there which we can look at. And at NICE so far, there were 2 appraisals for prostate cancer product, Redexa, and for ContraSelect. And ContraSelect came very, very early and didn't have enough evidence. So the story with ContraSelect is not over because we currently have a multiple technology appraisal looking at this product from 3 different developers, and decision will be made in 2016. So obviously a lot more evidence now, so I don't want to speculate in which direction this would go, but you're more than welcome to follow that appraisal. All meetings are open in public. The prostate cancer one, it didn't go well because obviously it didn't go well for the company itself, but then the product did not show that benefit that they were claiming the money for. So cost effectiveness of that product was absolutely unsustainable by the system, and the benefits, clinical benefits offered were just not there to pay for this product. Glybera and Holoclar are very interesting ones. So Glybera tried to squeeze into NICE on a number of occasions, and it's still trying. On the 27th of November, we'll have another go for topic selection for this particular product through our highly specialized technologies program. Hopefully it goes through. So for appraisal, well, we don't know what kind of recommendation it'll get. Holoclar, the scope will be circulated to the stakeholders in the next 2 weeks. So this is very much in the radar, and hopefully NICE will look at this technology and make a recommendation. Another very interesting engagement that we've had with cell and gene therapy developers is scientific advice. So obviously I had scientific advice. I see all these products. Quite a few of these projects were done in parallel or jointly with other HTA agencies or in parallel with the European Medicines Agency. Absolutely fascinating engagements because companies brought to us their plans for the development of these cell and gene therapies. It's actually, as you see, a good combination between cell and gene. And 2 and 2, we got some experience from both sides. And companies ask us questions about the product development plans, about clinical development plans, and about economics. And some of these questions are pretty difficult. And for some of these questions, we don't have answers. But we're very grateful for companies bringing these products and asking these questions, because even if we don't have an answer, we jumpstart the system to try to find these answers. We go back into NICE, we go back into Department of Health, we go back into the institutions that may help us later on create the infrastructure and get you the answers to these questions. So, but I think the lobbying from cell and gene therapy developers was very strong, and I think UK heard you. So there's a lot is going on in England and in the UK. So I wanted to give you just a very brief overview about different initiatives which are available for you as developers. And I think actually when I was putting this together, I thought the UK is actually incredibly organized to help developers of cell and gene therapy products, and I wish they were that organized in other matters of life. So we at NICE and throughout the system are there to work with you. We're there to help you figure out how to bring these products into practice and how to improve patient outcomes and how to actually bring them to patients. And there are a number of steps of how we can potentially do that. So, of course, engaging early, and some companies are starting to do that, and we'll have a discussion during a panel session in terms of how companies can bring their products, what kind of questions they can ask, how this engagement can happen. Balancing risks and responsibilities. This comes to us. We need to understand your problems. We need to figure out whether our decision-making systems are up to scratch, whether a regulatory system is responding to your needs in the right way, but obviously from your side as well. So how are you doing your trials? How are you managing to bring relevant evidence to decision makers? International harmonization. These are interesting products to an extent that there might be rather few centers across Europe offering certain services, so some national decision-making might not be suitable for that context, or national decision-making might be based on the fact that treatment might be administered abroad. So we really need to talk to our international colleagues across European countries, not just HTA agencies, but within hospital settings and many other institutions. And we need to figure out whether we can provide you with enough resources on our side to, if not develop your product specifically, at least to help you jump all the regulatory hurdles. And of course, develop risk-sharing schemes when it comes to the introductions of your products into clinical practice. So for UK specifically, obviously you have European Medicines Agency and you have the AMHRA, which is the British regulator. And I'll say a few words about this in a moment. So, but there are very important networks in the UK, which is National Institute for Health Research and academic networks, which run clinical trials, which provide you with the infrastructure to run your trials. NOCRI is a small organization, but it is your window into this clinical practice landscape in the NHS. It's your window into accessing all key opinion leaders in your field. So they would provide their services for free to you and connect you with the relevant organizations in England or relevant centers. And then Innovate UK, where companies can bid for funding to do their trials and to do their development work. Cell Therapy Catapult is a very interesting initiative in the UK, working with your companies, providing you with services, providing you with the support. NICE, obviously, is fundamental to the decision-making on your final stages of product introduction into clinical practice. And then, of course, Department of Health is an important player as we report to them, and they are the ultimate decision maker in terms of that red box and the money that will be allocated to products. In NHS England, because obviously not all products will be going through NICE, some products might be going directly through highly specialized settings within NHS England. So just a few words what AMHRA can offer you. There is an innovation office. There is where you can ring in with your questions. There's very interesting setting for regulatory scientific advice at AMHRA, which is done with multiple stakeholders. You can involve Human Tissue Authority. You can involve Health Research Authority. You can involve some other organizations into these discussions. AMHRA will do it all for you. It's a cross-agency engagement, and there is early access to medicine scheme. Very interesting initiative. We'll see what it can deliver. But the first product that went through promising innovative medicine designation is cell medicine product. So, and it's interesting to see how many more of these would be coming into AMHRA. And obviously, European Medicines Agency is doing a lot to support developers of ATMPs. So there is free service there's a fee reduction for developers, and there's a free service for orphan products, and there's a fee reduction for small, medium businesses for scientific advice. We do parallel advice with EMA for your products. You can get parallel advice with the FDA. So, and obviously there are initiatives such as conditional licensing, accelerated assessment, and adaptive pathways. So a lot of regulatory tools you can explore, and we can answer some questions on that. So within the UK, we had the Regenerative Medicine Expert Group, which ran, I think, for slightly over a year, where they considered whether the UK landscape is prepared for your industry to meet your needs at all levels, at the regulator level, clinical level, and the reimbursement level. And there were a number of recommendations. So each agency was tasked with steps that we need to take in order to eventually create the infrastructure for your products in 3-5 years, when some of these products would be coming to life, to integrate them into the system effectively. And of course, to make UK the key market for the adoption of these products, but also the key setting for the development of these products, at least within Europe. So for NICE specifically, the question was, are the methods of technology appraisals that we use currently for pharmaceutical products, are they fit for purpose for cell and gene therapies? The short answer from NICE was yes, and I'm quite convinced that in 90% of cases it should be yes. But obviously, giving the benefit of the doubt, there might be some deviations that we may need to make for cell gene therapies. So we commissioned a mock appraisal on the non-existing therapy. It's run by University of York. It'll report next year. So they're trying to figure out if a product like that, it's for one of the lymphomas, it's a cell product, would come to NICE with different types of evidence. How would our committees go about making the decisions? How would they make decisions about pricing? How would they make decisions about sufficiency of evidence? And see whether our threshold is fit for purpose, whether our consideration of quality is fit for purpose for cell and gene therapy. So look forward to reading that in 2016. And accelerated access is another initiative in the UK. It's not specific to cell gene therapy products, but it is looking at the entire innovation landscape in the UK to see how we can get patient access faster to innovative products. Obviously, cell gene therapy is very neatly fit into this structure. And this is to see where we can harmonize system, where we can make things less bureaucratic, more smooth, where we can adopt certain schemes that make life easier for you as developers, but also provide us as decision makers with additional tools. And finally, Cell Therapy Catapult. It's a very specific offer for cell gene therapy developers. If you come to the UK, they will engage with you at all levels, helping you with your product development and helping you understand the UK landscape and overall needs of this industry so far. Any questions at this stage?
So at this point, we could take a couple of specific questions for Leeza. If you have a question, if you could raise your hand and ask for the microphone.
Virginie from Bluebird Bio. Thank you, Leeza, for your great presentation, as always. I just had a quick question about, I think you hinted at the fact that you're evaluating how NICE is working and whether the processes you have internally in the commissions and the evaluations are appropriate for cell and gene therapy. And if I understood correctly, can you give us some insight into perhaps some of the things that you're thinking about that could potentially evolve or that could be customized or adapted specifically for these products, if you can?
It's a difficult question because obviously, as I told you, this mock appraisal is in progress, so I'm not sure what exactly it would deliver. It's definitely based on the principles for the appraisal of our pharmaceutical products. So this will be the core for decision making, because, and the reason for that is that the red box is we have to establish value for money, and it doesn't matter whether it's monoclonal antibody or cell product. You're replacing something out of that system, so you'd better be bringing the value which is worth replacing something else. So this kind of decision making framework will not change for sure. What may change is little aspects in terms of evidence generation. But my personal view, once again, this is not to reflect what NICE will decide in their methods guide, is that real change will come through negotiation of risk-sharing schemes. This is how you roll it in, because in terms of evidence, as long as you do a good job, as long as you do the best you can within your trials, and sometimes you understand that there's nothing you can do but a single-arm trial. Even though we'd love a randomized control trial, this is understandable, but you bring what you can. The question is next is, how do you generate real-world evidence? How do we respond with reimbursement to the extra evidence generation that happens? But this is slightly post-factum after the NICE appraisal. This mock appraisal will not deliver that. So that's why I think there's a requirement for the new initiatives that we really need to think about. But so far, I think we're learning from you, because you're bringing products to us, you ask us interesting questions, and if we don't have the answer to these questions, we go back into the system and prompt the system to respond. It was not, for example, a problem for the ATMP, but a big issues arising in scientific advice now is that we get a lot of questions from companies when they have a basket comparator. And how do you methodologically deal with it? And we had a few appraisals, but there's no clear methodology. So we're commissioning that work to take it forward. But it came because we kept getting questions from scientific advice. So we keep getting questions from ATMP. So that fits in. So things like that, fine-tuning methodologies for things we haven't dealt with, and really looking at the mock appraisal to see how committees may be making decisions under increased uncertainty. Where are these leeways that they can give? So, but nothing more specific at this stage. Thank you. Yeah.
Jean-Philippe Conval from Ginsai Biologics. I have a question regarding the authorization in Europe. Most of the products are under exceptional circumstances. Does that change any view on your evaluation, or does that re-emphasize the need for risk-sharing based approach, basically?
I think both, because I think what I see in the system, first of all, we have very, very few products so far to make any generalizations, and some would be under conditional, some would be under exceptional, we'll see. But most of these products, I agree, would be not coming through regular pathway. But I think what happens is, let's say it's a faster reimbursement, but the companies forgot that NICE exists and they need to talk to us as well before. So the miracles don't happen. You don't get your authorization in a review at NICE tomorrow. The companies need to book things with us as well. So what happens is the reasons for certain delays in the system is because products are not being notified to us. But if they're notified to us, we'll look at the product, and to us it doesn't make a difference whether it's conditional license or full license. What makes a difference is obviously the product is being brought to us with less evidence than it would have been brought if it was a full license. So with less evidence, there's more uncertainty, there's more compromise, and there are more risks of negative decision. But in terms of our processes, there is no difference, and I think it's responsibility of the companies to talk to NICE as early as possible to be on the books, because I think we're booked up until 2018 now.
All right, I think we'll move on. Thank you, Leeza. So next we have Andrea Chiesi.
Good morning, I'm Andrea Chiesi from Chiesi Farmaceutici, and some 7 years ago, we founded a company that's called Holostem Terapia Avanzate, which is specialized in epithelial stem cell-based ATMPs. And this is what I'll be focusing in the next minutes. Regenerative medicine products, in our definition, are those that bear the promise, which is an objective and the promise still to be shown, to cure. So to reconstruct or regenerate the tissues that are either missing or damaged in people. Not all the ATMPs are regenerative medicine products, according to our definition, but some are, like the gene therapies, like Leeza, the tissue engineering products like Holoclar, and they could be administered in a single treatment and cure after just one shot. And this is one of the big issues that we'll be discussing today. Why? Because they are costly to develop, they are costly to manufacture, and so they will bear a big price. That's to be paid in one solution only, apparently. And so this individual cost being so high gives little also possibility to become lower in the future, because most of these products currently are autologous. Our products are autologous, so they are made for one patient only at a time. And so economies of scale in manufacturing will not be that big. So it's clear that the issues are there. But I think that there might be a perspective under which, through which we can start looking for a solution. We are thinking about efficacy. What do we do? Our products do try to give answers to unmet medical needs to patients who have issues like limbal stem cell deficiencies, eyes that are very severely damaged, they cannot see anymore. The products can restore sight, can restore a good and stable epithelium on the cornea side of the eye. In terms of our ex vivo gene therapy, which is our next product, Hologene, that's for the different forms of epidermolysis bullosa. Last year, we treated a 10-year lesion that was not healing for 10 years. And after a year, in the bottom right-hand side, you see that the new skin is there. It's genetically, ex vivo, genetically modified skin. It works. It's there. It still is fine. So if we think about efficacy, I think that also these hurdles for these products can be tackled. And I would like to highlight two specific hurdles. One is the hospital exemption. And the reason why I'm highlighting is that the way it's currently, apparently, is being applied across the different European countries is not even. So every country tends to have a different approach. But currently, it has the potential to preclude the commercialization of new products, and I will tell you why. Because there is no control on how it is applied across European countries, and all that's behind the treatments that are made in the hospitals is very different from what we do in developing our industrial products. And also the one-time costs versus the chronic cure and the chronic payments for some of the different approaches from like regenerative medicine. It seems that a risk-sharing facility is the way forward. Yes, I totally agree, but we have to be specific, as already was mentioned, and think that there will be also issues. What are these deferred sales? If you remember, American Airlines have all gone into bankrupt because of the unredeemed miles when they decided they were liabilities. All the balance sheets of these companies fall into the red, and they all went bankrupt. So we have to be very clever in the way forward. About the hospital exemption, I will not spend time on the regulation because we all know it. But the regulation states a lot of different things, and that's my point here. Not all these things are done in all countries by all institutions, and this poses to me several issues, because if we cannot find a way, possibly an even way, and a clever one, and a rational one, how can we continue developing our products? Our products cost about 40–50 million to develop, thousands or hundreds of euros to thousands of euros to manufacture. So how can we compete if there are entities that do not manufacture according to the GMP, do not have any control about the raw materials, do not certify or validate methods, and so on and so forth, carry no safety studies, carry no clinical proof studies. They might be cheaper, but I'm asking myself, and I think our patients are asking us, are they also safe and effective? This puzzles me. Quite frankly, it's not the only issue I have with this, because I cannot see why academia is pursuing manufacturing when they are there for, and we pay them for, educating our people, our students, to carry out innovative research. So why are we, as a European Commission, so all our countries are spending and funding startups to become manufacturers, and then they do the same and finance also academic groups to do the same work? But then, if this kind of uneven attitude across the hospitals and across the institutions still apply, why are these European patients treated in different ways? Who is caring about that? And last but not least, so why did we spend 7 years in validating all our processes and all our product if there's and I tell you, there are hospitals not doing it but still treating patients around Europe with what they say is similar to our products. And finally, also, I have another scientific question. Why are these groups not pursuing clinical research? Because hospital exemption will not give the community the clinical data. So I think this poses a lot of questions that need answers. About the one-time cost, though, I see the issue that most of the regulatory decisions has already been mentioned. They will have to be taken on not complete data. Possibly the data, the trials that we will generate will not cover the desired lifespan period to be proof of truly efficacy, especially for gene therapy. But it is true that we should consider the treatment, the issue, and the patient, and the unmet medical need, because the overall financial burden of the healthcare system, and I just put some figures here from an article about hemophilia B. The current treatment is $200,000, $300,000 per year. If it's 30 years, it's about $6 to $8 million. Discount for inflation is $4 to $6 million. So that's the current burden, economic burden for an orphan disease, for a patient, sorry, of an orphan disease. So there's room, I think, to improve on that. And I agree that the potential approach could be an annuity-based risk-sharing kind of facility, but this is very, very, we have to be very careful with that, because this might not work, because there are countries where people change the insurance companies, and so the new insurance company should take on a burden that was taken before them. So the ruling is not there to take care of these situations. These deferred sales are already mentioned. They have to be clearly regulated. How are we going to treat them financially and fiscally? Some of these products, if we are not paid a big part of it, we will not cover the cost of goods sold. So we will not be in the black as companies. How do we deal with that? And this is the most difficult part to me. What are the endpoints that will be used to determine efficacy year in, year out? How do we how can we define right endpoints? Another approach could be to limit this period, not to annuity until the patient's lifespan, but to give a shorter period in which to exert the scheme. It's got good things. It's got a known termination, so you know how many years it is going on at the maximum. It will have a shorter period for the payback, and so reinvestments also in R&D. Still, the issue of the endpoints will be still to be defined. In essence, I think that there are very severe threats to continuing developing some of the ATMPs, especially I'm thinking again, I'll tell you, autologous regenerative medicine kind of products, because there is not a business model out there yet. We are trying to establish one. Some ATMPs, though, will change people's lives and their families' life. And although they seem very expensive, if we not forget why are we doing it, these are the patients that are coming to us asking for an answer. And if we can provide the answer, I think we can. We have already seen it. We have already seen situations like that with new technologies, cell phones, flat screens. they costed 100 times more than they do cost now. So there will be a learning curve to go through. Enabling technologies, they will eventually draw down a little bit the price to develop and manufacture these products. But I think that a careful and smart approach should be followed and developed in order to find the right way to bring these treatments to these patients. And we need to work together. I fully endorse the nice view. We have to work together to solve this issue. Because if we have efficacy treatments, then we have an answer for these patients, and then we have a value, I think, also for the payers. So thank you.
So if there's a couple of questions for Andrea, and let's remember that we have a full hospital exemption panel towards the end of this session, so maybe hold those types of questions until that panel discussion. But if you have any questions for Andrea, we have time for a couple.
I just see that there is a lot of anguish and a lot of concern why the regulatory bodies, they do not move faster and to produce and to legalize all these products. By looking from the regulatory point, because I'm a member of the CAT, we just entering an area that we do have no experience very much. The cell and gene therapy products are very complex products. They very diversify in every aspect, and we have to be careful what we're doing as a regulatory body. We know that we have conditional approvals, we have accelerated assessment, but I have to remind you that the regulatory 1394 was implemented, started in 2009, and we have now 6 years dealing with these agents, and there's a lot of complexities. I'm sorry we cannot move farther, but this is a reality. We have to deliver not unauthorized and sell products, gene products, but products that they treat the people. And this is the most important thing for us. Thank you.
I totally agree with you. And that's why we decided to follow with our Holoclar product exactly that path. That path was successful in the end, so I think we started running this learning curve, and it will be improving and improving. I wish more groups will do the same. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you for having the opportunity to put some perspectives into this discussion. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of uniQure. I joined uniQure shortly after the approval of Glabera about 2.5 years ago, and part of the transition now of bringing uniQure into the next phase after this success of having the first gene therapy approved in the market. And I think one of the key messages that I would like to bring across here is that I think this discussion about the complexities and the challenges is really about paradigm. It's a question of how to create alignment between the regulatory perspective and the mechanisms that are in place to support from the regulatory side certain challenging indications and to establish the link to the pricing and reimbursement paradigm, which I don't think today is fully aligned in how these two bodies and systems look at each other for certain of the indications that we are talking about. And I think the point that Leeza made, that it's what makes gene therapy special. Well, I think there are definitely aspects that does not make us special. It's a technology like many other technologies, but then are there other aspects, particularly in relation to the risk-benefit and in relation to this discussion about paradigm, that makes gene therapy special, and we just need to be able to flesh that out and to create the alignment between the regulatory perspective and the pricing and reimbursement. I think that's one of the key challenges that we are looking at in the future. And if you look at the pipeline that we now currently are developing, I think if you look at the top, we have Glabera, and I will get more into detail of how we think and that this example plays into that discussion. And if you look at the other examples, they follow much more the expectations that the current system reflects. Hemophilia, I think the value proposition and the risk benefit that gene therapy may present is probably much more straightforward. I don't think there will be a lot of discussions once the evidence is there with regard to the value proposition. If you look at diseases like heart failure, it's the same way, that you will be able to create strong, robust data sets to suggest that there is a true benefit and value proposition. If you take Sanfilippo B, for example, if you look at the number of patients, it's around 2,000 in the world. Glabera is 2,000 to 3,000 in the world. But the ability to create strong, robust data sets will most likely be completely different for a small population like Sanfilippo than for Glabera at the time of approval. And I think this is what this is all about. What are you able to present and to the regulatory approval process at the time when your dossier is ready to be evaluated, taking into account the challenges around the patient population, the medical need, and the robustness of the data that you can generate, which in the regulatory context is about risk-benefit, and in the pricing and reimbursement context is about value proposition and what's the benefit for the system, for the payers. I think gene therapy has a huge potential here to have a very, at least for certain of the technologies at this point in time, very low risk component. The AAV, I think, is one of those examples where the risk component can be considered to be relatively low, which brings a lot of weight to the benefit. Now, how robust are you able to demonstrate the benefit? That is going to be the key challenge during these programs. Now, if you look at the regulatory path and the rocky road of Glabera in this process, which took more than 3 years, lots of reiterations, re-examinations, discussions, a lot of emotions also about what is the right decision to make here. And if you analyze the details of that process, I think that what comes quite clear by looking at the process, that the risk discussion with regard to gene therapy and the manufacturing, the quality of the product, the safety concerns was pretty early addressed in that discussion, and also I think much less controversial. What came really where things are getting complicated is what's the benefit, right? And how robust is the benefit that we at that point in time can base this approval on, and how much can we suggest that if we would wait another 10 years, would we then have a better benefit for this patient population by giving more data? Is that what we need? I think that's really what this discussion is all about. And when you look at the data that uniQure was able to present after 8 years, 27 patients with a very, let's say, diverse data set, which definitely has been challenging to generate from a feasibility perspective, from a robustness perspective, a combination of open label studies, dose finding, benefit over long term, up to 6 years of follow-up data to estimate the level of benefit, recognizing that this patient group does not have an existing treatment. There is a relevant medical need, but there is no biomarker, there is no validation of a strong, methodologically relevant data set that can be presented at the time of approval. And this, of course, feeds then into this discussion. So what does make a gene therapy a commercial product? Of course, you have to address the components that we all agree upon. It's about manufacturing, right? Quality, safety. All these aspects are very important, and they are at the top of the list when you bring this to your time point of your submission. And efficacy can be straightforward in certain indications, with certain aspects where there's validated endpoints, validated trial designs, populations that are easy to enroll in trials or to establish benefit on. But what do you do in these cases where that is not the component that you can address? And typically, as you can look at our pipeline as an industry, you select the low-hanging fruits if you can, right? Because that's where you can generate your business, and the more challenging indications, it's more difficult, it's more challenging. The learning, if you look at the Glabera story in this context, is, okay, Glabera was the first gene therapy. It was groundbreaking to establish that recombinant AAV can be considered a commercially viable technology, safe and effective for administration in certain patient populations. Now, the process to reach that from the regulatory perspective was a huge learning. It took lots of years, and the only reason why this was feasible in Europe was the mechanism of exceptional circumstances. And it's important to recognize, and I think that's what I heard here in this previous presentation, exceptional circumstances and conditional approval and full approval are three very distinct mechanisms. And exceptional circumstances and conditional approval is not the same. Because with a conditional approval, you are agreeing that you do another study and then you have a full dossier and then you have an adequate representation of the risk-benefit. With exceptional circumstances, you basically accept that you will maybe never be able to generate that dossier. You will never be able to bring the data to the table that clearly determines the risk-benefit. That is an acceptance of the system, and Europe has that mechanism that we accept that for certain high medical need indications, you will never be able to bring that level of evidence to the table, even after your approval. You can only approximate it. So at the time of approval, you are left with a lot of questions about how strong is the risk-benefit at the time of approval. So the challenge is, I think, in this discussion about what's the paradigm that we are moving into, it is the paradigm of going from exceptional circumstances, which is not specific for gene therapy. I think this is also for other technologies. But it's the question about the risk-benefit discussion that you have at the time of approval with the regulators, taking into account all the concerns that the regulatory bodies has, into the pricing and reimbursement discussions where currently the system matches us up against what has traditionally been required to determine the value at the time of the discussion with the pricing reimbursement. So you are matched up against products that have clear value propositions, clear evidence, clear data sets that you can present and that determines the price and the value proposition. But what do you do in cases where you, in fact, as recognized by the regulatory system, do not have that in place, and it's not even possible potentially ever to generate that? So is there a mechanism that supports that you need probably also to establish something like adaptive license or risk sharing or something and make that more clear and create the mechanisms and the boundaries around that so that the industry can start establishing, so what is it at the time of negotiations that we can present based on what is feasible and possible? What is the perspective of what we need as an industry also to take the responsibility of having to generate with regard to additional data? And as you may know, for exceptional circumstances, for Glabera, we are enrolling patients in registries. Over 15 years, we are conducting natural history studies. We're doing additional trials to substantiate the data that have been approved, recognizing that more substantiation is needed. It's not clear today what is the real true benefit, but also recognizing from the system that we may never be able to generate that kind of truly strong evidence. So for certain patient indications, that's the reality. I think that yesterday with the NIH representative who also suggested that they are interacting with the FDA about these indications where there is, maybe you cannot even generate natural history. How do you deal with these rare diseases where you are challenged on the amount of evidence and the strength of the evidence that you can support in the regulatory context? Europe is far ahead. We have the exceptional circumstances, but we don't have adaptive pricing. And I think that's where we see a lot of challenges, and we may even have to establish other paradigms like special funds for rare diseases or other mechanisms that are less linked to the traditional paradigm of how do you determine value and what's the value proposition at the time of your negotiations for products that are coming in under exceptional circumstances. So I think that was my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a couple of questions specifically for Christian, or should we go directly into the panel discussion?
I just had a quick question. You mentioned adaptive pricing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you have in mind?
Well, I think this is just to bring in a word.
Okay,
right?
all right.
So maybe to start feeding that into the NIH or whatever nice groups that there is this need to establish something that matches this regulatory mechanism, which is, I think, a mechanism that has been established from our politicians, recognizing there is this need, right? But the pricing and reimbursement bodies have not adapted a similar mindset at this point in time.
Well, why don't you join the panel, Christian? And also joining us on the panel is Francois Meyer. And do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Francois Meyer. I'm a physician by training. I work at HTA, Autorité de Santé, the French HTA body. I'm also engaged, HTA is engaged in the European cooperation on HTA, the UNETA network, and we were also coordinating the SEED project called SEED for Shaping European Early Dialogues, a project in which 14 agencies participated, namely NICE, and NICE was very active, and Leeza particularly in this project. And I think that's it for the introduction. I may have shall I say a couple of words about the situation in France and with regard to Europe before the panel, if you're okay with that? Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple of comments, and maybe if you allow me, I will start with an announcement. On October 30, 1 month from here, there will be in Paris a seminar co-organized by my institution and the European Commission. The name of the seminar is HTA Sans Frontières, to give some views and allow some debate on the cooperation on HTA, on both sides, how HTA bodies can cooperate, particularly in the field of scientific advice or early dialogues, and also what came out of some research projects on HTA that were financed by the DG Research, DG RTD. Two of them may be of interest for ATMP, such as Advanced HTA, to develop new methods to evaluate some therapies that are not maybe very easily evaluated by the current HTA methods, and integrate HTA on how to evaluate complex technologies. And there are two other projects, Adopt HTA, and the last one I'm just forgetting about. But okay, this is free for registration, and you can go on the HTS website and register if you're interested in this meeting. And the keynote speech will be given by Alain Fischer, who is a professor of immunohematology in Paris hospitals and who has developed gene therapy for severe immunodeficiency deficits, with the first trial starting in 1999. So that's, I think, an interesting story and an interesting testimony. Okay, sorry for the long announcement. This is for free, so there are no commercial objective. You have no registration is free. Then now, with regard to the how we can look at the question of ATMPs from an HTA perspective, I really could say exactly the same words than Leeza said for the situation. You just have to remind that, I mean, in many cases, developers of some technologies are telling us, you guys, HTA, you are using methods that are not adapted to our very specific technologies. We have heard that for orphan medicine products. We are constantly hearing that for medical devices. But basically, we just have the mission to evaluate any sort of health intervention. And our mission is to try to evaluate with a good scientific basis what will be the consequences of this introduction of this intervention in the healthcare system with regard to both the patient's benefit, and what we have to look at is not any surrogate, whatever, or hope or projected thing, but really what will change in the health status, what will be the magnitude of the health gain for the patient, and how does that compare to existing therapies. Really, this comparative effectiveness research has the same philosophy for any health intervention, including psychotherapy or whatever you want to look at. And of course, look at the consequences for the society, everything that Leeza mentioned with the cost-effectiveness analysis, with the budget impact, and so on. So this is something that is completely general. Now, of course, we have to look at all the specificities of the interventions. And with regard to ATMPs, the two things I wanted to say that of course, it's a very heterogeneous category, because you may have a very complex gene therapy that maybe in the future will be performed in 1 or 2 centers in Europe, or you may have a cell therapy that can be performed in any hospital in Europe. So that's very, very heterogeneous, and the consequences are quite different. The other point is that there are maybe complex therapies where they have the status of a medicinal product, but you need to have 1 or 2 medical devices involved and maybe some specific procedures that have not yet been evaluated. So this is complex. And in France, with regard to this complexity, I would like to highlight the fact that at HTS we have the mission to evaluate any sort of health intervention. So we give our advice, and we can give an advice on combined therapy using drug devices, whatever. This is not a problem. But sometimes the decision makers downstream may be different. We have a decision maker for drugs and devices, that is basically the pricing committee. But for procedures, we have another decision maker with the Union of the National Health Insurance Fund. So sometimes the coordination downstream, after the HTA body, is not that easy. We have to take that into account. Then I think we have the question on how are the systems able to incorporate innovative technologies where there is a level of uncertainty at the time of the first assessment. Can we accept that, and how we can deal with that? And of course, we have all these questions of coverage with evidence development, of managed entry agreements, everything that is around that. But what is the situation in the concrete situation in France? I will take the example of what we call
Francois, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we really want to move on to interactive discussion.
Okay, so I'm going to do that, finalize with that, because I thought I had 10 minutes to intervene before. That was I understood, but it's not a problem at all. It's not a problem at all.
Okay.
I will shorten my 10 minutes with that, because, okay. So there is no problem at all.
Apologies.
So there is something called the Forfait Innovation, that is an innovation package, that is an interesting story, but I have no time to talk to you about. So if you're interested, you just send me an email.
Ask him about it.
No, I just like to finish by saying that this is a very interesting combination of where we need to make progress at a national level, because the decision making in terms of incorporation in the healthcare system will still be done at a national level, and of course of international cooperation, because as it was mentioned by several speakers before, we need a cooperation in this field, and we do have now very good cooperation at the HTA level, even if we cannot achieve everything you would like us to achieve, because we do not have the same rules across various countries. But currently we need to have the same level of cooperation at the level of the payers, decision makers. That is something that will be difficult, but it is certainly needed for the future. We should all cooperate to foster this cooperation, that the cooperation incorporates also the decision maker. That will be crucial for the success of the introduction of these new therapies. Sorry to have taken too much time.
So, we've heard a lot of discussion about the regulatory pathway and then the payer pathway. And both Leeza and Christian, you mentioned that there needs to be some more interaction there. And Leeza, you encourage people to come to NICE earlier in the process, when I think that many developers feel like they have to get a more complete data package to be able to make their case to the payers. So I wondered if we could encourage a conversation between Christian, who's worked through the Glibera process, and Leeza about what is the give and take there between having a more complete data package and coming to you early enough, because I do think we're all concerned about getting regulatory approval and then taking additional periods of time to get payer approval. So I'd like to hear a discussion about that, and then we'll open up for more questions. Should I start?
Okay, I think it's very important to understand why would you come to NICE earlier. This is definitely not for a decision or an approval. Coming early is for advice, similar with the European Medicines Agency or with AMHRA. And earlier means you can come at any stage as long as you're already done something in human, because coming before the clinical concept is established is perhaps a bit too early for us. You can go to AMHRA and to EMA at those stages when you do animal trials. But as soon as you start doing your first patients, this is the good time. We don't need to see your results. A lot of times companies come to us, I mean the standard company with a non-different product, as you say, comes to us before phase 3, usually, and some companies ring up and say, oh, we need to postpone because our phase 2 is not going to report. We're not going to review phase 2 data. We're not going to make any decisions of phase 2 data. It's for company to decide when they want to bring the product. We don't care. It's just sometimes, obviously, based on phase 2 results, questions for phase 3 may change. But it's not about completeness of evidence. It's about the questions you want to ask us and the cases that you want to present. So there is no right or wrong timing. They're good and bad questions, or well thought through questions or not thought through questions. And once again, I think we had fantastic engagements in parallel with the EMA. We had at least one product going through seed, where we had discussion with HTA agencies, and products were quite early. There's no such a thing as phase 3 trials, looks like, in this field. So, but raising the issues for economics, for clinical trials, for acceptability of this very small sample size, let's say very unusual trial designs, adaptive trial designs, all of this we're there to discuss with you. I'm not promising to give you all the best answers to all the questions. As I told you, this is learning from both parties at this stage. But you'll definitely find the payer's perspective enlightening, and hopefully you take some learnings to design your future trial. So that's the whole point, is to get the input from different stakeholders early enough to change your development plans. If you've already done stuff and then you come to NICE and say, okay, how well did I do? That's usually a very disappointing meeting, even for quite established and easy projects, because they probably did the wrong population and they definitely didn't have the right comparator for NICE. So coming early on is a much more productive discussion.
Do I need to first? No. So this is, I think the challenge here is, because I don't disagree at all. I think having early interactions at the level of the regulatory bodies and the pricing bodies is, of course, something that we need to recognize, and it brings in a lot of value. But if you take indications like LPLD, which is, I think, is a very good example for this, where you have the passion of an academic group and patients to wanting to have a therapy developed for them over a period of 10 years without any other options for the therapy. And if you would look at, if you would have interactions with NICE, 10 years ago, most probably nobody would have continued to develop that product, because the challenges of actually being able to suggest that the evidence that will be available is strong and robust, even if you change the trial designs or you enroll different patients, will still not be feasible for certain of those diseases, unless there is a mechanism in the pricing system that recognizes for certain indications where you cannot make that kind of adaptation, even in the development, which is something you will already understand early on. Because when I would have a discussion with you about our hemophilia program very early on, I think we would have a very easy discussion about what is the robustness of the evidence you would want to see, how do I have to build that into my development plan. I don't think we will have a lot of controversies there, right? But if we would have a discussion about how do I design my development plan for lipoprotein lipase deficiency, where I have basically very, very limited opportunities to develop a trial design that addresses the needs that you are currently having in your paradigm with regard to value proposition, I would not continue to recommend to pursue that indication. So I think it's this need to, from the traditional perspective, yes, give advice early, but you also need to adapt into the mindset of these ultra-rare diseases where the mechanism, exceptional circumstance exist. And that kind of advice can actually not be, it can be given, but it does not give any value, because you may only conclude that you should not continue to develop that product.
You haven't been to any of our meetings, have you?
No, I haven't. So I'm just taking...
So, I know I need to respond to that, sorry. Well, I mean, if you came 10 years ago, you're right, because we didn't have scientific advice, so you wouldn't get any input at that stage. So, but now, I mean, even let's say 3 years ago, we didn't see these products, so it was something new. But first of all, advice, whether it's at the EMA level or at FDA, I mean, I'm not sure about FDA, of course, but at any HTA level, none of these agencies would ever tell you stop developing your product. We don't tell you do this particular trial. We give you options and we give you our concerns. Then you go away and you decide what you want to do. And if you as a company decide to discontinue, and we had companies not in this particular field discontinuing their development plans for commercial reasons, this is your strategic decision, and maybe that particular decision saved them millions rather than being a bad thing. So, but if we look at it from another perspective, if you're developing this product anyway with the hope, first of all, to help patients, and that secondary to hopefully make some money out of it, by choosing not to talk to a payer, if you still plan to be on the market, I just don't see a logic in this at all, because it's better to know, if you consider us as an enemy, it's better to know early on everything you can about your enemy, so you can sort of prepare to an extent. But the idea is for us is definitely not to discourage you. The idea is to say, what you're doing is very controversial. These are our concerns. This might be a problem. But then when we keep seeing these products over and over again, what we realize is that way too many concerns and our system is not prepared. Let us go back and try to change the system. If you choose not to come, if you choose not to pose these questions, you will never help us change that system. We can't sit in our ivory tower and know what's happening in your world. So
I definitely think you misunderstood what I was trying to say, because I definitely didn't advocate for not coming. I was actually advocating for what you actually also suggest is the need to have the system recognize that there are other needs, and that it can only be established by the dialogue. But my point I was trying to make is that if you don't have that mindset that there is this need to adapt to a different reality, the advice may be not the adequate advice. So that's all I'm saying.
We do have the right mindset, don't worry.
So that is, I mean, that, and I was not trying to be confrontational. I was just trying to establish that's what I think is where the paradigm shift needs to be established for these particular indications and these particular mechanisms, where you cannot measure it up against the robustness of data that you can generate at the time of approval. And that's really the message.
These kinds of conversations and have specific, even if it gets tense or, we have to make specific points, but because only by working through these points will we come to the good answer. Let's involve some of the audience in the discussion. And this woman right here.
Thank you. I'm Maria Cristina Galli from... Oops.
It's okay.
Does it work?
Yeah, there it goes.
I'm Maria Cristina Galli from Istituto Superiore di Sanità in Italy. I'm glad to see that this conversation, to me, it proves that the field is maturing, because the fight between developers and regulators has been shifted from the approval stage to the later stage. So this means that the field is maturing. But I have another type of questions. The first question is, we heard yesterday, and we all know, that there is a good amount of public fundings during development. So what is the impact, if any, and if it is considered, the impact of this public funding given to developers on the consideration about reimbursement? Should the public share in some way, and I'm speaking as a taxpayer, as a citizen, should the public share in some way the benefits of this exercise? First. Second question. As I am not an HTA specialist, I would like to know if all these paradigms that we have been told about are applied also to consideration for other drugs, let's say cancer treatments which have never been, or, I mean, sometimes are not proven to be effective against recurrence, for instance.
Francois, do you have a...
I didn't get the last part of your question. With regard to the first part, I think that there is no impact on the fact that there were some public funds in the research with regard to the assessment and the appraisal of the drug. Obviously, it should not have any, and so there is no. There are criticism from some people saying that these guys from industry, they receive money, they do not really pay for the development because it's paid by public money, and then they ask for very high prices for the technology. So there are some people saying that's just what I can mention, but who paid for the research is not something that we take into account when doing the assessment and the appraisal of new drugs. I think that's obvious. But and the second part, I didn't mention what about cancer treatments that did not prove any added benefit, you mentioned, and they were accepted. Well, I think that, okay, Well, I thought the question would be the reverse. I mean, and that it would be up to the UK representative to answer that question, because that's something that occurred more often in some countries than in others. Well, in France, systems are moving now. We have introduced the cost effectiveness analysis as an additional tool. We were obviously focused to the comparative effectiveness and clinical data. Now, for expensive drugs, we do also cost effectiveness assessments. I think the criteria are a bit getting closer to each other, even the conclusions are not all the same for the products. I think that we should really avoid for this ATMP product is to be the situation where we conclude, and that has been the case for the first assessment in France, that we are in front of the promising technologies, but we do not have the adequate data to make an evidence-based recommendation for the funding of this technology. And this is where the scientific advice, early dialogues play a role, because the data you are submitted, if some discussion had been been done at the level of at an earlier stage for the early dialogue or scientific advice, this would have maybe made possible for the companies to produce the adequate data to have real conclusions at the level of the HTA, the appraisal of the drug. I think that's key, really.
Another question? Yes, this gentleman.
So I've got two questions based on kind of the discussion at the beginning, and similar things have come up across reimbursement talks over the last several years. The first question is for the payers of these therapies. And one thing that comes up a lot about the development of these therapies is the expense of manufacturing and how costly they are. Yet it seems like the response is typically the value of the therapy is what indicates the reimbursement. So is there do you take into account the cost of manufacturing when you look at reimbursement? Or does it matter to you if it costs $1 or $1 million to manufacture? It's all based on the therapeutic benefit. And the second question is more for the developers. Again, based on some comments earlier, one thing we hear a lot about is the potential problems or what they perceive as problems in a private payer system of people moving from healthcare to healthcare every 2 to 3 years. But when I've talked to private payer systems in the U.S., that's not actually a big concern from what I've heard, because they have that issue all the time anyways. I mean, look at, like you said, hemophilia, people are on chronic treatment for decades, and yet they're still moving from healthcare provider to healthcare provider. There's been more recent advancements in the U.S., at least, of not allowing treatment paradigms like that to be a problem moving. So have there been specific instances where you've seen that problem, and has it arisen to date? Because I think right now it's a theoretical problem, but I haven't seen it actually become an actual problem for people yet. But curious if maybe there's other experiences.
Leeza, do you want to answer the question on whether you take manufacturing costs into account?
Yeah. So it is controversial. I think obviously. Every magazine you pick up now or journal says that it's more than $1 billion to put a pharmaceutical on the market. So not that it's cheap and all of a sudden cell therapies are expensive. I think the key difference comes that unique per patient manufacturing obviously is very expensive compared to what it costs to do the pharmaceutical product. But regardless of what the manufacturing cost is, whether it's your 13-year development for $1 billion or over $1 billion, or it's a shorter development for an SME where it's $1 million to do it per person, it is definitely incorporated, but it's incorporated by you when you establish the price of your product. For England, it's free pricing market. Whatever you tell us your product costs, we'll take it. No one is saying that we won't tell you this is the price you need to sell at. We'll take the price you take. The difficult question is, will we reimburse your product at that price? And if we get a no, then you go to the Department of Health and you negotiate, you give discounts, you figure out how to get in there. So, but no one is telling you what is the price. I think eculizumab example for highly specialized technology is an extremely interesting case. It's unprecedentedly good technology which delivered over 10 QALYs per patient, while if you don't know what a QALY is, just to give you an example, that but if you look at cancer therapies, they give you 0.5 QALYs per patient or something, if that at all. So the benefit was amazing, but then the cost of treatment per person is $500,000. So this is also, you don't get many cancer drugs at $500,000 per person. So it gives you the idea of how the decisions are made. But of course, cost of manufacturing, companies figure out themselves with their price setting. I don't think it's a very linear formula. So for cell gene therapies, it is a specific issue because obviously companies are small. Usually you don't have the backup of huge pharma where they can distribute their risks and costs and decide to sell certain products cheaper to get the market share, for example. So here you are more tied up to that, but obviously for some products there's hope in the future that price of manufacturing may go down as things become more generalized. For some products it might not happen for quite some time, but then obviously if it's that expensive, it's better be delivering something amazing. So, and then balancing that off. If you're developing something super expensive which barely works, you're in the wrong business. So, and I'm sure there might be some extremely expensive things which are just not worth paying for.
Yes, question here.
My question, my comment goes to what was said by the gentleman in front of me here earlier, and what was raised by Dr. Chiesi in his presentation. It's a bit like the proverbial gorilla in the room. Cost, price, reimbursement. When you are starting to see products that actually cure, you are not treating a patient for life, but you're curing a patient. Whether it is in these examples or ultimately down the road, somebody comes up with a way of tackling type 1 diabetes at the age of 12 and the child is cured. How do you pay for that? What price do you put on that? Because you're now talking about a life. Right?
I mean, sorry, can I?
Yeah, why don't you have a short answer and then let Francois answer as well?
I mean, this is the key value proposition that companies try to bring us. And when companies brought to us hepatitis C treatment, I can see the result in 12 weeks, and they did bring robust data. Here, the claim is you're cured, but we don't know whether that patient will just drop dead in 2 years because of that therapy, because for some adverse effect. We don't know. There is a claim which we need to substantiate for longer term. And I think what needs to happen is the system needs to take a part of the risk. The system needs to believe that this is a cure and to pay something for it, but then not to pay the premium because we don't know what's going to happen. None of these companies can provide convincing results of a real cure. So it's that's exactly where the compromise need to be coming from. We have seen quite a few products, let's say, promising a cure, but in a sense, it's an incredible improvement, but it's not a cure. So we don't know whether in 5 years that product might need to be readministered, or in 5 years what seemed to be cleared by your blood test or your other tests may return. We don't know. So, and you can't expect the system to believe fully based on 6 months trial, a 12-week trial, or 1 year trial. So that's where this whole discussion today is going, this kind of negotiation. But I'll pass it to Francois.
Yeah, just to add very briefly something to that. I mean, that so Andrea, you mentioned the annuity-based system, the possible advantages and the possible problems. Anyhow, this is not within the hands of HTA bodies. This is within the hands of payers, decision makers about pricing and so on. So this is something for which we again need to have their involvement to solve the problems that maybe by general options that could be available all across Europe, and by some specific measures that would be necessary to adapt to the local system. So that's something for which we need certainly a dialogue. And certainly I can concur with what Leeza said. We need to have more data and to think about observational data to be sure that we have the expected effect.
So I think what this brings up is that to affect a cure, potentially to prove that it's a cure, you might have to do a 60-year 60-year trial. And as a developer myself, there really isn't a feasible way to anticipate a 60-year trial. So if we could have some comments or questions as to how do we provide the evidence, or what do we do about reimbursement when it's just absolutely not feasible for anyone to think about a 60-year clinical trial. Anyone have any comments, suggestions?
No, I would like to comment on that, because of course trial is not the right word. So you are a bit playing with words, Chairperson. Data can come from various sources of data. We're thinking of patients are now including in registries, in databases, in whatsoever. So there are a lot of sources of information about the patient status. So this information exists. It should be captured, not be lost, but this is not, of course, a 60-year trial before getting approval for reimbursement.
Gentleman in the back.
So, we've not opened the Pandora's box for harmonization. So I see for the regulatory approval processes, I see all kinds of approval pathways coming from centralized, coming from mutual recognition, also decentralized procedures. There are all kinds of possibilities to make a product go in the regulatory approval process. So I'd like to just get a short overview on what's going on harmonization, on the HTA, mutual recognition pathways, which could be possible in Europe. I heard there's some very cautious activities going on at the European level, but you might comment on that?
Yeah, I think you should know more about it. I'm surprised you're not more informed about it, because there is no legislative background for this harmonization, as opposed to the regulatory, where something happened in 1965. And then it took 30 years to create a centralized body that was set up in 1995. So now, in the field of HTA, there is no possibility to have mutual recognition, central approval, because this is the responsibility of the member states to organize their healthcare systems. And unless you have a new legislative frame to change that, we can just engage in voluntary cooperation. So we can prepare some documents, we can agree on methodology, we can do some joint advice to give, because we can share, we can issue some recommendations for the choice of endpoints whatsoever. And that we are doing within the UNETA project, and a new joint action for 4 years is being prepared now. So have your say in your country and say, that's what we want HTA bodies to cooperate on. But it will be a voluntary cooperation, and you will have one HTA report per country, sometimes per region in some countries. So this is something that it is a legislative background we cannot change. So we can make a lot of progress in this voluntary cooperation, and we are making this progress. But there will be limits, because there is not the same situation as in the regulatory frame. But of course, this is very important to make progresses. And then again, we have the third level that should be involved, that is the level of payers, decision makers, that currently are not engaged in a real cooperation, significant cooperation at the European level. So that's really something we should fight for, I think, in the future.
Thank you. So that ends this portion of the discussion. We're going to now move on to another panel discussion. So if we could all show our appreciation for these panelists.